Recording in progress.
Ħuwdlig wuċin ħasati dekat Johan. ʼayaa da gwellísaku. Ḥuwdlig ye jechani. Daat ye ḥwajin wunai. Weta. Ḥuwdlig tut wuchich. Atina khadeti. Gwell just kleinach ye khadeti ya gwell kho akejini ḥuwdlig ya kayeti. Llsidain. Ḥuwdlig wetatin. Away ḥuwdlig Dísi. Gwellísaku qanins kashuk at yata. Gwell kashuk llqai adasa. Gwell ʼayaa ʼayaa ye jineiyí. ʼayaa adaye dunei. Away we IT ye jineiyí dukhandi guti. Yisatinge Gus'k'iḥwáan yata kasaye at we tsina ḥuwdlig katla itch. We IT ye jineiyí adaye ji. Just ada outliqen. Ḥuwdlig. Hechwasaku kasaye at kashuk gaslighting ye ḥwajin. ʼayaa ḥwasatin yata. How? Achtosagu ye achi. Ja just kusti da. Yachana. Wedech Skhalneek Ḥwasagu daat yuch tatani. Yuch tutla adi. Kleka Xóotsx X Shaawát. Kaats'y Kaats'y. Ḥuwdlig kelcha shuguch sati chaqut at. Ye ḥwajin wiqunana qadekina hastsu has ausaku. Xóotsx X Shaawát. Gwelchucha gudach kunach tlagu Skhalneek. Helwudisku gudachsa. Helwudisku adusa ʼayaa weqa dusai. We Shaawát. Ḥwutusaku. Ajoi ye ḥwajin tlagu wuchich ʼayaa yan kak at qoa. Koiqan has ausaku ye Skhalneek. Llingit wutusaku ye Skhalneek. Dekina has ausaku ye Skhalneek. Kutia ḥwasatin shit kak dech Xóotsx yadki qatleg Shaawát qaduchuch we Xóotsx. Ye awe hechwasaku adusa awahin qoa we Skhalneek. Ade awe qoa Ḥuwdlig ya. We ashuwu ade awe yanshuwatan ye. Qanakhawe adat yutakhutang. Ye awe khwaach. We just ʼayaa has a Ḥuwdlig. Naki klan ka yilnawu. We Xóotsx ach keitlia yik. Awe dushat ye yosaqa. Llsidain qut has shun qallachichen. Ik has helhaska kwajaq qa'a. Haskhatka kwajaq. Wan qanins we Skhalneek weta. Achtu unique daat. Ade yutukhutaniye. We do yetki ʼayaa qadushat. Gwell we Xóotsx X ausaku. Urke wuti hastu kusti. Anjowe do shat. We takat we Xóotsx Ḥwuwdlig. Awe yatatsu adati tukhutan. Ḥuwdlig has with the art. Gwell shukwa ayadu has ausatin. Xóotsx wusati. We Shaawát. We Kaats'y ausanik has to dlak. Ka hechwasuku gwaldu wak li takt has outliqin ka has ausaku qeqa du tlaq khusati qas wuda aat has tu ani de aqar klingit khusati we Shaawát du yet kitsu klingit ad yetki wanani sawe ko al kleinacha du ik Xewawus. Hilke wasa oti. Just ashkutliet teen. Qeitla haak yudo sago at kakwan ishea qeitla haak. Hak kwatlun. Tash qeqa an adutlun chunet qa. We Shaawát tash du twashko. Ye awe qoa. Xewawus. Wan ni soye ka. Dla gug. Ash has Ḳuwdlig. Has ash Ḳuwdlig. Aqa we Shaawát ausatin. Eqa an adulun chunet. Du jiwa du ik. Wan achsaya hechwasaku qaqti ausane yechwaji. Aqa Xóotsx X Xóotsx khusati du ik awa jak. Helsu showden noog. De huja. Du yet kitin. Hast du ani dachwu gut, wuat, askatu yikte, kelkuch wuda gut, we Shaawát, de Xóotsx X. Ye awe gwallin shuwatan weda, we Ḳuwdlig daatu has Ḳuwdlig atgen, wasa atwune. Ya atwa atya wune, qanachwe a atina khayati. Tuk qidaqaku. Ye awe wasa we Xóotsx. Kalleya khuti. Ajwe gwal. Qishtiaq wasa atwune. Qa wasa atqwane. Askatu yikh. Kdein yuqatan haste daat. We dachte sego at. Klingit hasaq aya achch. Yata qoa. Jakutat. Yiwaqshike qasani. Guksa gwal giweye ati. Ḳuwdlig yas ein. Yudu asak weqa. Hu owecha na kawani. Klelch Skhalneek a'yaa ʼayaa Ḳuwdlig qati Shaawát Kaatsʼ. Qeqa yisqiyi du asago at yadu Kitchkhaan adachna kide gwallisaku yadu Kaatsʼ adiowe yaqwe has Ḳuwdlig yadu qanach yaqwe has Ḳuwdlig qayadu qanach ta aqaqanach tedi yadach aya weda yetaqo yisqiyi yudu asago yisqiyi Elketein khosaku gutaxsaqo teqwidi ani. Teqwidi a'yaa hastu adu Kaatsʼ. Yata kelchushuku Shaawát we kelchushke atyuqewatan. Yewe ye ayos ye yawaqa. Ye yawaqa. Kaatsʼ ko just atu gut weqa. We sheech hoods to twosaku. Hu owe ausenech yechwaji. Ḥuwdlig hu owe outlet sin dit eir. Klesli twaashku du chuch awastini. Aqa awe juya wushas wuda shaa. Aqa awe hasid ade owe has kudashiya has kudu washiyya. Ḥuwdlig ʼayaa Ḥuwdlig ati Shaawát du S'eek has du Xóotsx Xhalneek Xóotsx kunachawe has Lingi Xóotsli ʼayaa Kachya Ḥuwdlig at kunachas au shagug we Ḥuwdlig Kachkoshi we Shaawát has outliqin. Aqaawe has satin we Ḥuwdlig Ḥuw. Has to Ḥuw 2 day ʼayaa. Kaatsʼ has to Ḥutini. Tlikuti at the way we Ḥuwdlig has satin has to Ḥutini. Qakan Ḥuwdlig a 2 day a Kaatsʼ. Clark Qoa. Wasadu Sagat. Has the good Clark. Kin Kehasushken. Qakan Ḥuwdlig has our Ḥuwdlig. Quaxwega Qoa. Akin away Satk. We Xóotsx has our sakugu saye has wuti. Has our zinik. Has to daat du daak. Aka away. Has a yawat laak. Kaatsʼ tlech shug tlech Xóotsx teen. Kaatsʼ away. Gwell du hunch qadu kiik. Has to twas a good du ʼayaa has Ḥuwdlig. Du hunch yat atin. Wasadu sago at. Has out liqas. Yekshe aqaqakwashi yak. Khasagu kwalla tu yedi. Yid qakwatishi qa. Khatse. Yad. Catches. Catch yakhdi yada. Atwullaqas. Catch has awha. Catch has atwuha. Catch dasa. Catch just. Cathin. Catch dasa. Kunya gich anach koa. Get the yach has Ḥuwdlig. Aqa away. Quash. At dulqas teen. Yada. Kash sugar. Yada. Glikach in a fasting you do a saga at. Ye awa. Quash. Has ausaku. ʼayaa. Yek dashi. ʼayaa. ʼayaa. Kunachawe qeqe. Qeldasa awucha. Qeldasa awdana. Ye awa quash. Quneke awashi. Qeqe. Yek dashi. Qeqe ʼayaa. Just qune ʼayaa. Ḥuwdlig. Qune awashi duhunch Kaatsʼ. We qaqan qeqa. Qaqan Ḥuwdlig. Shaawát awe akawagan. Ausaku we Ḥuwdlig. Guksa we Ḥuwdlig. We qaqan Ḥuwdlig itik. Awe qoa we duhunch. Qeqa. At wulqas. Jayegu kinki atcha Kayat einach awacha Kachtu idian wuha Ajoy klech ultsin we qakan Rus Ya Kaatsʼ du shat Hu owe Budahan Du jin teen Qakan Rus Adachowe awaguk Qade huj Tashas awas kukuksa Kosatin we Sha yada Hil eka ko akhosatin kuksa Kwashe iti yagi du kik akawa ak Eka teltasa awacha Du tuwu tlitsin Aka awe Kedain awashi Qeqe yek achiyi Aka we qakan khus Tsuwe kuwu tude awa Akawa gan We hoots too with the han, a cow ak du jintin, a dach awa guk. Wasa shetzin koa, judechi a du jin a tunach a cow gun. A cow wash, a joe hastu at kachwali setin dech a hoots jinni ka woosh kutzetiag. Stika khatiti khana kawa negadan. Ka yat atsu. Wanneer soja wajak de chuk we Xóotsx. Je awe je yawaka. Ja ach kik tin ach tuwasagu ach ani de wugudi. Tuwagasagu ach in kakiki good. Aka ach shatchikuch sati. We Xóotsx hitwasak wati Xóotsx chusati. Tlingit chusati kal Xóotsx. Ye awe eka du ini yosaka. Keltsu yuch ak gitan I shattin, which aguda du shat kutzati, ani kuk. We Xóotsx keltu toashgu we Kaatsʼ, du shat yiyi in yuqewatani. Kelte hin qoa hin ʼayaa de wugud. Gwalli sitin. Aqaqa kwashiwe ade yuqewatani ya tlatsa tsikhwa kusa was a good Johan zu Isatini, where you getank. Yat. Kaatsʼ ʼayaa was a ku. De kutsikushe yuke Ď'k'wáan at ausatinga. Ye awe du goose. Du wakshi ke ausene, kinde awe awe yishtu na ati. Du shatyi kaweta ewa woos. Datsachaw at ausatin, yu awe ashtaya kacha. Yat atsu kwalchakuch, ade awe chana Ḳuwdlig, Ḳuwdligas ein. We shatyi ye ausene ka ye yawaka, ye yawsaka. Kaatsʼ illi. Du inyuch ewatan qoa. Achowe we Xóotsx du shat. Ye awe shakawaja du yatki. I ish. Ach tuwasugu katuk de yashunayi ati. Ach awe gakgijak. I ish gakgijak awe I ish. Du ʼayaa ye has ausene. Ish, katuk de ayakachtu aan. Ye awe, ade wuat wuchin. Ach awe, has zu Xóotsx, has out to eat. Akad, the cut du jin, a dach awats et. The cut du Xóotsx, a dach awats et. Konach wel du sha zu. Shaawát the Kaats'y Kaats''s Ixwa at the way. We Xóotsx X to shut. Katug tude awe wogood. Kanahawe wogach. Kawa ak. Kuchte a kawa jail ayadu. Du chuchi. Eka ko ahu na. Gach da shi awe. Hu awe a kausha shi we gao. Ye awe chana kawanik judechi a. Ach tuasagu yisaku. Walchagut. Gao awe. Tleshin kakwanik le kakinachya yidat. Kallisikwa at. Ach ina kawanik ko a. Ḳuwdlig a dredu tuasaku with the school ya hastu ayi teqoiti shadahan khusati hastu hit tsati ya hu owa ashagu Xhalneek khatu tuasaku khatsaku a dre yi in khkhwanik ya yidat kal ach ayi ya ach a tasqo a teqoiti an gundachaya Chaagowe aatlein teqoidi ich nakide haswulskaatsen ga hastu dachaya aatlein a hasjausedak ishiteheni a shankwedi shangukedi chukanedi kagwantan ka wushkitan yeltakatras dakistana gwalwe teqoidi atwulskaatsen adach ye awel kutsi at yashkalnik khalte katwishkalnik ki Drecht was a gui, ye achi achana. Cheese. Gus'k'iḳwáan ye dat again?
I'm getting a yep. I can't do. I just
It's a young. I eat it. Yeah. Ach, tuasagu a dadiwch tani. To ye haswutian. Gwall Cleidushu tagshu hichen gwaldachadushu. Sheet kak gechat butien kutan. Chitka ach een ach shatka ach yetki. Hit yich butien. Sal nearly aye butien ze kadushet kaduyeti. Where hachoni yich daati you do a sab. Hutsu hit kuru yaku. Sheet kak. Kai tu we outer coasteen, a dicka schoon. Awe, yet the two a diajahone, kuhanti, ha, yil ha kuakan. Eo to ish kadasta ya ka uch kla, wujin yeja tu a ne ada. Akawe, ya ha yeja ne ak. Kautua ak linkit enach yuch out la adk. Dasta chana kawanig. Hast du in Ḳuwdlig Xhalneek. Gus'k'iḳwáan. Chana kawanig dasta chu qistin yitau at sinda ish daguni nach kagu we yak yikt anushi yak tlen khande haswakuch. Ye awachana kawanik achtuasago wudasku has to saku. Eka at away tlelches S'khalneek dulyechen. Eka away yawahi. To a'aya. Kluknach ati atachawe has Ḥuwdlig ti wait achtain taan. Ye awe ade awe kunach dark Ḥuwdlig ni gawe a daat. Hit awe has outlayech kluknach ati. Qodnachu atachawe ikide has wulgaz. A tuwan a dark. We do a takdeen hit a wehas outlayer. A dagoit takdeen tan Ḥuwdlig. Ja hast du Skhalneek a judechi a. Ye owe achtawa sagu tua achi. Du ʼayaa. Du sai owe S'eek. Putsu we Clarence Jackson du sai qastin. Ja, naats klar kashachuka. Adaye has jiwanetse. Ye owe yakdat ka angun ye has jiwane. Ya gidat du yu katangiak tuasago atwutusa ahi. Ya du
To aka owe dua chak. Atkan hit ki kachaye hit saye dakate. Yo yan shuka away do a sack to a just late kayan of gasje. One and so it takes out at Gani you awa good. A wed late yachati at the way you heen hookad out of the teen you yak ark. Kesa titch ka adusli teeth. One and so it a kahanya akunat sen. Da say you. Chakut atayo. Chakut atayo. Yes, goyuga. Godachsat ye atawe. Ye khwaji awe. Yes ingit ani as yes. Yes S'eek zu kochte kochta gut. Atain atawe ayach atyati. Jutewel to ayach awe den. Hin nada. Tayo akade nada dakakaden. Ye gakasen ko as. Akadach nadanuj. Jota kanach awe kewshikor. Jotawe antkini awe at gutudu dikel. Jastakat adat khitsu at gutude kaudu ajil. Ya at gutuda awe dulkin. Wana nisawe tekaseyeden wuduwa ach. Kajushayena awe hindu dutsikik. Tel isatinik adat khiyeda adoka. Tel adusach ultinik. Yisatinuk ni teх gochsati. Yesayu had uwakoch. Adat awaat. Adat at Ḥuwdlig kachato asi dadawe uat. We're sailors. One and isowich ark dultini owe. S'eek. Owe duwa S'eek. Atuna hawe kuyo duwa was. Owe teich kunas tiga owe. Atunach dultin. Owe chuaach asqinil teich unas ti owe. Ye kuyawaka. Ke ade dagach qakucho. Ke ade dagach qakuch. Dasayo. Owe tlitachnach yiska owe. Jowe ask gutudach. Wis seed. Ja, goe do a saak seed. Ye go do a chut. Jota a yich awa at. Ke adatas uwa koch. Adatas uwa lit. Adatas kuch owe. Tich zed. Ja, Ḥuwdlig. Jota a qede has to chuch. Kaatsʼ jawes dus chuch. Kaatsʼ. Ke akis uwa at. Adas wus teksu yes at qosatinj. Kaju at wuslitsi ja kutain owe. Jotaya ay hiti destu in ana adawe has ausitin. Jotas has shwudzitin. Kach tunach katin ten owe ayiko. Tunach katin ten. Kaya hai akade do watini at tayus awasa. Jotaya kukidi destu in awa at. Akawestu qeich at tutich. Woon nawestu qeis wududzi woon. As altin. Geit tleutu. Kate lew as to qayida go to in. Jotaya ku khude awes alkhun ya date lew. Kajushu ga awe. Yaku awe woon khas uwaji. Awech as altin wana nisawe agaw to Ḥuwdlig. Hakan. Kayida no yak eshekte. أجوا Ḳuwdlig جوتا ʼayaa يوون ماجد ʼayaa استكاد يدا استقيت تسخاء كناو استقيودو لنا ناو براندي كيو جوتا كسيدين ياشنتنوك كالتسو واسيا ياشنختنوك أن كسيدين ياشنختنوك كتوسا كتسوختوخ يجي كنخيخ يسقياقا استكاد يدا أيك تستوئينيو أكو آدوه تو قياختستوئين آوات هستوجيه أو دوا كوخ كشوغا كقات أجسدو تزيئو هستوئين كادونيك آددوس إيه هدات كتسكشوه جودو تزيئي كالخاق أتقاجه كالأكاد قدو تزيئي قد كياناس كوخوه كوناش كالنيك أنت كيني أيو أيكو كسيئي أتسو أيكو تشوش يهاي داكيد they're looking glass تشوش يهاي داكيد جوتاش توديتين ياقوه هاقيسو دوتزيئي وون جوتاش تكاد سكانيك آخوه استكاد أدادي داك قياواقو تخشيقاتيت قاين وقوخو أيه التوآكا نخ لتويا بعيد وساك التوآ يلاسكي كخ ها هوج أوه أخشكالنيكي أسقيو خيو خدستين يسقا خدستين ساقوا ديو أخسقيو نوتين كده هينيو شاقواني خواتاي خانن غسقيوت
أقول Skhalneek Ḥuwdlig يا تاتو يا Skhalneek daat يا تليكاخ إنخ إتخايخ أقووس يا والياتا دا تلي أداتا سوا كوخ أداتا سوا لد شكوا يا تا أوه خانا كاونيك دا دقا دخ أوه هسو كوخ وندايين إخكيدي دقدي هس أوه قوال أياو لتساق أجوي هس تواسقو وش تسيقن يهس أوس نيان وقنناتين آتلين أتهستو جيو دقا دخ أدوغو آتلين أدوغو هستو يانغو يكت تلش هستو توا أشكو ودتاغي وأتدوغو أجوي تشاتل Kaats'y teen Ḥuwdlig ودليخن ويتشاتل Kaats'y gwell يا ʼḤuwdlig ودتلك daat داسا أتوييتي قوخوك يا أوه هستجي وآتلين أدوغو أوه تشاتل Kaats'y gwell أتوييوتين قوالحس أوقها قاهس أو سكو أدي أو دقيس يه أقاتل حين تودي كقصني أوه إي كخ أوه كهيد هستو كدو قد يخ أوه وجهين هستو ياغو قا دخنخ قاق أوه شوتنيخ كلك وكند توقن ياغو كد أوه كد ونوك جيش يخدو أخت دقيت قا وجاقود قا خيخت يخ أوي دوا أخت دقيت قوا يه أوي إخواسكو قوكسا حسب لهاش والديوج يلتكت وياق يلتكت ويقو يخوجي ويهين هس أو سني أوي داكو لهاش شاد Kaats'y gwell كو والأدعو هين خكخ أوي أو تتين وي أنوشي داسك شوي ويدا أدي أوي هسو قوخ كتندي هساوي وش دخل أو زد أتلين أتدوغو أتود قنخوي أتدوغو قاهس قوشي ويقا أجوي إيسياوقا يندي قختو خوخ ʼayaa Qatisit like gach to satinit. Yeah, owa aqa yata qone yawahi. Bilchish Johan. Into guess who you tani lingitrinach guk aqa stikata yejine datit yuqagachtilaat tritrinach. What's the difference between hasuwakukh and hasuwashit? You ever go shitting before?
Sail?
I would be is. Yana shit we yak what eek dane. Gao yak out do a ha. Yana shit. It's for a any guesses?
Speed kayak?
Yeah, it's for a boat to really just glide through the water. I mean, it's like the verb is sliding. It's the same one for shita. But the shit ashit is usually like a kushta sliding down quickly into the water. But it's also for a boat to just really go flying across the water. Great stuff, like a really different cadence and tone, like really amazing speaker though. And it's really interesting to hear when there's some speakers when they drop English words in there, like they sound very like Shingish, but it'd be like Brandy, Giwe. Like it just sounded like his English was really good as well. Like it was just really interesting to me. The name, like Dastya from Sitka, really wanted me to make sure people knew the names of the people. Now, according to her, there were 4 people who were on the boat that went out to meet the Russians. It was Chu, Qistin, Yita Awat, and Sinda Aish. So they still know who went over there and who made that first contact. This is first contact with Tlingit and Anushi. And then there was lots of stuff that happened after that. But yeah, it's often called Yechyagu, Gus'k'iḳwáan. What is the, let's see, what else can I ask you about? What is the Xóotsx?
Hellebore?
Yep, it's hellebore. So it's a extremely poisonous plant. So just be very careful. But this is another old word for binoculars. And so because if something can turn you to stone, you look through it with Xóotsx and it won't turn you to stone. So now you know. There's also a medicine in the root, but don't mess around with it unless somebody shows you who really knows how to do it.
Do we speak really slowly now, or what? Like just listening to these, quite a few of these speakers, yeah.
I would say yes, but I also think that maybe what would they be like if you just sat down and talked with them? And maybe we just need to listen, go find more George Betts recordings. But I guess like Nakishan is a little bit more paced, Shah Dog. But even he, like when that boy first sees, goes up in the saddle of the mountains and sees that cannibal, he starts talking pretty fast when he gets really excited there. But like Susie James and George Betts, like these guys are pretty fast talkers. I guess we'll listen to Donawak when we get to the Raven stories. He's pretty, but he was also like talking being recorded at a radio station. So I feel like sometimes Donawak and Shah Dog Like they knew that people were going to learn from this long time up from now or from then. And so they probably did speak like real deliberately. Ḳuwdlig was a pretty deliberate speaker. But there's a few of them that I knew, like even when I was learning Tlingit, Ķuwdlig was a pretty fast talker. And S'eek, sometimes she liked to talk real fast, she hardly ever talked to me, but she would talk real fast and she would just see if I could decipher it. She'd really laugh and be like, okay, say it again, say it again. And so I do think though it has, as we sort of are learning too, like we're like just barely able to talk. And so that's another thing is we have to think so hard about it. But I do think this is something to think about, both in terms of the pacing of our speech and the depth of our verb use. Like if you really get when he's saying like nukni and some of these other things, like you just nuke, you don't get that. You get nooch, but like nooch is like always. But then you could also say nugene and nukni and nuke, and those are all like they're different. But what's interesting is for each of those, you could do it by conjugating the verb and the prefix, or you could do it by adding that suffix to what looks like an imperfective. Skydu?
Yisakugi wea Skhalneek. Would that be like, do you know if that would be like contact, this story? Or would this be like post contact? I'm just wondering, like, in terms of like that would be this is our contact story.
Well, there is one before this, but I would call this first full contact. So the other story that precedes this one is the Russians come over towards Alaska, and I think the first time they tried to contact indigenous peoples here was Little Diomede, and they go near the island, like, oh, there's people up there, and so it's kind of living on these cliff faces, and it's a pretty rugged kind of island. I mean, they're amazing people, and they get close, and people just started shooting arrows at them. It's like, well, I better not. So then they had an astrologist who predicted that there was a giant island south of what is now Kodiak, and they didn't know anything like what was there. So they head that direction. And I think, so if we look at a map of, let's see, of Southeast Alaska, I'll just pull one up. So if we just pull up the little map here, so like here's Ḳuwdlig, here's Ḳuwdlig, and then one of the theories that it's somewhere like up in this area. So this is near Xóotsx. So somewhere up here is probably where they make first contact. And the story there, which would be fun to tell in Tlingit, would be they pull up and they're a lot like Lituya Bay, but it's not Ḳuwdlig. So one of the things where Ḳuwdlig and this place has in common is you can have these places where these 2 points of land come pretty close, like Dísi, and you can get a boat in there, but you really need to know the tides because you can get sucked into the sides really bad. And so those were really safe places for villages, was right on the inside of that, because people had to be so cautious getting in there that if they're coming in to fight, you're like, oh, okay, we got time to get ready. And so, yeah, I think so. No way. I don't know who told this story. That's a good question. But it's in the Anushi Tlingit, and I talked to Dick Dowenhauer about it. And so there was this point, these 2 points of land, and they could see that there was a village on the other side of it. And so they lower a rowboat full of sailors, and they say, okay, go over there, like try and establish a trade relationship, And if you get in trouble, shoot in the air 3 times. And they're over there for days. And then the big boat shoots up at their cannon 3 times to say, like, okay, like, come back. And they never came back. So they sent another rowboat over on the Yagu. On the Yagu. Kaushaya. They lowered it. And then they go over, same thing. They had the same instructions, same amount of time goes by, nobody comes back. On like the 4th day, like this Tlingit canoe comes out, and these Tlingits are yelling at them, and they wrote down what they yelled, but it doesn't look like a Tlingit word, so I don't think they wrote it accurately, but maybe. And so the Russians took off, and they went home. They're like, yeah, we sent 2 boats over. They got killed because they never came back. And then I'll see if I got that one. Maybe not. And then the Tlingit version is like this rowboat came over, and once we started figuring out how to talk to each other, these guys are like, yeah, we're slaves on this boat. We'd really not like to go back. It sucks. And the Tlingit were like, well, just stay here. Just be with us. The second one came over, and they're like, oh, you guys are going to stay here? We'll stay here. Because like they were indentured servants. Who would be the first ones to go? Like you would send the indentured servants over, be like, yeah, go check them out and maybe get killed, right? And so and the Tlingit story is that they just stayed, and that the family ended up moving down by the Ḳuwdlig area. Then there's a third theory that they came in there and their boats just got wrecked and they just all died. But that's sort of, and then this is the first real contact, is where there was like interaction. And then from this point forward, there are always, I guess, what the books call hostages, and I don't know if that's the best word for it, but basically the Tlingit boat would come up to the Russian boat, and they'd say, okay, send 2 up and we'll negotiate. And so they would send 2 up, but they would make sure 2 Russians came down. So that way, if anything happened, it's 2 for 2, right? It just evens out. And so they would do that for quite a while until they started forming villages and stuff, or forts anyways.
So just in terms of time, this happened before any migration happened interior, right? Or would this be like, you don't think so?
No, I think, okay, I got a theory on interior migrations, but some of it I'll say off the record. And we're almost at 7 o'clock anyways. But the part that I will say is I think the Tlingit come along the Nass River. I think they start to settle in the Tongass area, and you have Tanta Tlingit, which has no tone. So if you say the word heen, which in Southern Tlingit would be heen, and in Tanta it would be hitten. So there was no high tones in Tlingit back then. And then I think they start to settle some villages, maybe over in Prince of Wales, maybe not. And then this big flood comes, and I think people are expanding. They must have gone over to like Kaatsʼ and to Ḳuwdlig, who the original Tlingit were, which was probably Ḥuwdlig and ʼayaa. And then there's a big flood, and they go inland. ʼayaa splits to Ḥuwdlig. Ḥuwdlig splits to Dísi. And now those 4 clans exist. And by the time the flood goes down and they come back, there had been some other splits because Ḥuwdlig were living on top of Xóotsx, and so were the Kaatsʼ and the Tihita. So there had been several splits by then that we know of. So then they come back and they hit this glacier. But I think by then you got maybe 4, maybe 5 clans by then coming back. And some of them go under the glacier, but not all of them. And the ones that go under the glaciers, I think they run into a whole other group that's probably Ḥuwdlig. And then they're the ones who bring tone into Tlingit, perhaps. Like, there's just a theory. And then there's a whole group that says we don't want to go under the glacier, and they went inland. As far as where they settled, I know that they had a village called Shaawát, whether that was during the flood, after the flood, it's really hard to tell. And then they did go inland, and so I know some of the inland relatives like to say that the Tlingit are only there recently. I don't think that's true, but I do think it gets confusing because there was that. So this is a migration going north from the Stikine, like around the Telegraph Creek area. And so Tlingit were in that area, and that's absolutely Tahltan people are there, and there's other people who are there. I'm not trying to take anybody's like claim to land. But then they come up and around. And so this is really interesting because they go all the way up and around and come down into Ḳuwdlig, and that's how you get the Ďuch'lawidi there in Ḳuwdlig. This is according to Shakakuni. And then at the same time, you have Qanaqtidi who were coming from Qanaq and went way north and went up to Ḳuwdlig. And then they built Ishkahit, and then they left from there and they go north and go over Marsh Lake area and form a village called Kushtaghagu. And then they went around and then became Ishkitan. And then you had another group that built a place called Kukhit. Some people know where that was. I'm not exactly sure where that was. But then they became Kukhitan, and then they went up the Taku. So the Taku, the ones who go up Taku, that is a more recent migration, but that still precedes any contact with any Europeans. What happened there was somebody they encountered some people and they said, "You're Tlingit? Oh, we're Tlingit." And then they melted the glacier and sort of formed. And then when we end the recording, I'll tell you one other part that's a theory, but people will probably come at me with their real hunting arrows, not the play arrows, if I said it on a recording. But this is fun stuff to just like it's such big language, and like what I continue to think about with a class like this is like, let's get there. It's going to take us a long time, but let's get there. And if you have to memorize, but like what you're doing when you do your 5-minute story to like end our class, I'm not asking you to mimic these ones. And so if this was a guitar class, you don't have to be Jimi Hendrix by the end. Like you just have to play one of the songs, right? And so just tell one of the stories. I think we should focus on a story. I think that's a little bit easier because it's got characters and certain events. And just do your best. And if you have to write sort of a simplified version of that you can memorize, go ahead and do that. Memorize is great, but I also think you should have this internalized so that you are thinking about this story and telling us, and you can have emotion and other things. And it's not just, I have memorized how to make this series of sounds, but like to the point where like you could stand up in some sort of gathering of like a small gathering of Tlingit speakers. And if I say, hey, tell that story about that place, you could do it. Other thoughts or questions before we unpause and then go?
Yeah, the reason I asked was because I always wondered, like, if there was contact in this side when they made contact with the Anushi, that if there was like a contact moment in the Dhaka side that we had a story for.
Well, they were in Latuya, and then they end up they had a fort in Yakutat, got burned down. They built forts in Sitka, they got burned down. And I guess the closest is there was another fort. Is that Selkirk or something? It was up pretty far. And the Tlingit they hiked way inland and burned that one down too. So there was a lot of fort burning going on. What do they call it? We call it a wood shavings fight. There's this, when we get to Battle of Sitka, which some of them we'll just read because I know it's really great to listen to them, but some of them we don't have the recordings, or I could probably find it if I keep digging. But there's a scene where these two old men were saying, they're laughing, and their names were Ḳuwdlig and S'eek, which I think means breath a little bit, but it's a little bit different than S'eek, and little downy feathers. But it's interesting because those names are symbolic for like peace. But they're sitting there and they said, what kind of fight do you want? And he says, I want a wood shavings fight. And what that meant is they brought a bunch of wood shavings in and lit them on fire and burned the fort down. And those two old men burned the fort down, and they died in the fort. anyways, yeah. Anything else before we'll unpause and then we'll stop.
I had read a wonderful story of the European captain sent the sailor out to get water, and he doesn't return, and they go and all right, we're ready to go. And the guy says, yeah, but these people have long black hair like I do. This fellow was a Filipino who had been working on the ship, and he also said that he would be better taken care of and better paid by the Tlingit than by that European ship captain. Sometime before 1800.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wouldn't that be cool? Just grab my bags, leave the boat in some place you've never been.
Yeah. Just like everybody's got scurvy and they're mean to me. They got running out of good food. So yeah, I mean, it's such like we're talking hundreds of years and like just such a different world and such a different on both sides. Like it's not like life was easy here. Like that's hard living. Just everything was probably colder. And so if we go back to, I think if you go back about 500 years, like this whole Ḳuwdlig, the Juneau area, is mostly glaciers. Like there was hardly anywhere that you could really settle, which is why they went on these outer points where the first sort of settlements were. And so that's a pretty late migration in terms of the grand scheme of things, because these other ones were getting into these tens of thousands of years. And then when you start talking about a few hundred years ago, but I don't want that to be ammunition as like, oh, well, nobody even lived here. When nobody lived here. They were only here for 400 years, but then
I think there was actually quite a bit of desertion and dereliction. There was a story from Ireland that a Spanish ship shipwrecked there, and sailors washed up, and some of them decided not to go home, and that's why they're what are called the Black Irish, who have dark eyes and dark hair.
Yeah, because and I think you're absolutely like so there are these captains and these sort of upper class people who had these ideas of like mapping the world and sometimes colonizing the world. Then you had probably these poor people who are like, yeah, I'm just trying to live, man. And then they're like, oh, I could go live with you. That sounds great because I just have to work all day. These guys aren't lifting lines and pulling anchors and lowering rowboats full of people and going into dangerous situations. Okay. Gus'k'iḳwáan clean. We'll do a little transitional activity on Thursday, so be ready for anything. And then we'll also just reflect a bit on just Hashuka as the treasure that it is. So I'm going to hit the stop recording button and I'll share one more thing. Sheesh.